The medical bay on Quarantine Station 7 was not supposed to be this loud. Dr. Quicks pressed 2 of his 4 hands against the observation window, while his other hands worked frantically on a data pad. Inside the containment room, the small creature was screaming again. At least that was what everyone called it. Screaming. The sound was somewhere between a hiss and a roar, coming from a being no taller than a human child. The Varathi hatchling had scales the color of midnight, and patterns of light ran across its body like living tattoos. Right now those patterns flashed angry red, pulsing in time with its snarls. Its teeth were sharp and its claws were extended. 2 medical staff members had already been sent to the hospital wing with deep scratches across their arms. Ambassador Threlvax stood beside Dr. Quicks, her crystalline body refracting the red emergency lights into rainbow patterns across the walls. She was not happy. Her species did not show emotions the way humans did, but everyone could tell from the way her facets dimmed that she was losing patience. "How long has it been like this?" she asked. 37 hours, Dr. Quicks replied. His main eyes never left the creature while his secondary eyes scanned the medical readouts. "We have tried everything. Sedatives don't work. The empaths say its mind is too chaotic to read. Every xenopsychologist on the station has attempted contact. And the result? It attacks them all." The hatchling threw itself against the reinforced glass. The window held, of course. It was designed to contain much larger and stronger beings, but the sound of the impact made everyone in the observation room flinch. The creature's bioluminescent patterns flared brighter, cycling through red and orange. "The prevailing theory?" Ambassador Threlvax asked. "Radiation damage from the solar flares, or severe neurological trauma, possibly both." The destruction of Varith Prime was catastrophic. This hatchling was buried in rubble for 6 days before the rescue teams found it. Every other member of its clutch was dead. The ambassador's facets dimmed further. Then perhaps euthanasia would be a mercy. If it is beyond help, if its mind is broken, then keeping it alive in this state is cruel. Dr. Quicks wanted to argue, but he could not find the words. The hatchling had not eaten properly in 2 days. It had not slept. It simply raged against everything and everyone. What kind of life was that? The door to the observation room opened. 2 humans walked in, and Dr. Quicks felt a small flutter of hope in his primary heart. The Galactic Council had called in specialists. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, only 40 years since first contact, but they had developed a reputation. They were good at surviving in bad situations. They were good at adapting. Maybe they could help. The first human was tall and lean with dark hair pulled back from his face. His name tag read Daeho Kim Xenobiologist. The second was shorter with bright eyes and oil stains on her jacket. Her tag said Hana Park Engineer. They both looked tired, like they had traveled a long way very quickly. Daeho stepped up to the observation window immediately. His eyes tracked the hatchling's movements with an intensity that reminded Dr. Quicks of a predator studying prey. But there was no aggression in the human's face. "Just focus, tell me everything," Daeho said. Dr. Quicks repeated the information. "Rescue operation. Sole survivor. Increasing aggression. Failed treatments. Possible brain damage." As he spoke, Hana pulled out a scanner and began taking readings through the glass. "What have you been feeding it?" Hana asked. "Standard Varathi nutrition formula delivered through the automated systems. The composition is correct according to our databases. What about portions?" "Standard juvenile allocation." Hana glanced at Daeho. Something passed between them, some silent communication. Daeho leaned closer to the glass, watching as the hatchling paced in a circle, its tail lashing behind it. "It's bioluminescent patterns," Daeho said slowly. "You said the empaths couldn't read it. Have you tried analyzing the light sequences themselves?" Ambassador Threlvax turned her attention to the human. "The patterns are erratic. Random firing of distressed neural pathways. Are they, though?" Daeho pointed. "Look there. It just repeated the same sequence 3 times. Red flash, orange pulse, red flash, double pulse. That's not random. That's a pattern." Dr. Quicks checked his datapad. The human was right. When he filtered the recordings for recurring sequences, dozens appeared. How had he missed that? "Even if it is communicating," the ambassador said, "we have no way to translate juvenile Varathi bioluminescence. Adult Varathi use a completely different system. It would take months to build a translation matrix." Daeho was already moving toward the containment room door. "I don't need months. I just need a few minutes." "Wait. Dr. Quick stepped in front of him. You cannot go in there. It is too dangerous. The creature is violent. The creature is scared, Deho said quietly. There's a difference. Before anyone could stop him, Deho opened the door and stepped inside. The containment room was larger than it looked from outside, designed to hold multiple patients if needed. Right now it held one small angry hatchling and one seemingly crazy human. The hatchling noticed Deho immediately. Its head snapped around and its patterns blazed bright red. It dropped into a crouch, muscles tensing. Don't run, Hana said quietly through the intercom. If you run, it will chase. I know, Deho replied. He stood perfectly still, his hands visible at his sides. He did not make himself bigger or smaller. He simply stood there and watched the hatchling watch him. The creature began to circle. Its movements were quick and jerky, predatory. It was testing him, looking for weakness. Deho turned slowly to keep it in sight but made no aggressive moves. Then the hatchling charged. It was fast, much faster than something that small should be. Its claws were raised and its mouth was open, showing all those sharp teeth. In the observation room, Ambassador Threlvax moved toward the emergency shutdown button, but Deho did not run. He did not raise his hands to defend himself. He simply asked a question. You hungry or angry? The hatchling stopped. It was so sudden that it actually skidded on the smooth floor, its claws scratching for purchase. It ended up less than a meter away from Deho, close enough that he could see the individual scales on its snout, close enough that he could smell the strange, sharp scent of its breath. Its patterns flickered, red to orange, orange to yellow, yellow to a confused purple that no one had seen before. Deho slowly reached into the pack on his belt. His movements were careful and deliberate. The hatchling tensed but did not attack. From the pack, Deho pulled out a brown rectangle wrapped in foil, a human protein bar, standard emergency ration. He unwrapped it carefully. The smell filled the room, something sweet and nutty. The hatchling's nostrils flared. Deho broke the bar in half. He kept one piece and tossed the other gently across the floor. It slid to a stop right in front of the hatchling's feet. For a long moment, nothing happened. The hatchling stared at the food, then at Deho, then back at the food. Its patterns cycled through colors too quickly to track. Then it snatched up the protein bar and shoved it into its mouth. The creature chewed frantically, desperately. Crumbs fell from its mouth. It swallowed and immediately looked at Deho's hand, at the remaining half of the bar. Deho took a small bite of his piece. Then he tossed the rest to the hatchling. The creature caught it in midair and devoured it even faster than the first piece. When it was gone, the hatchling sat back on its haunches. Its patterns were still cycling, but slower now. The reds were fading. Blues were starting to appear. Deho turned to face the observation window. It's not brain damage, he said calmly. It's not trauma-induced aggression. It's hunger. Dr. Quick's 4 hands froze over his data pad. That is impossible. The automated systems have been providing adequate nutrition based on Varathi standard requirements. Standard adult requirements, Hana said through the intercom. She was studying her scanner readouts with a frown. Look at the metabolic readings. This hatchling is growing fast. Really fast. It needs way more calories than your database says. It has been starving. Ambassador Threlvax was silent for a long time. Then she said, the nutritional database is used across the entire Galactic Council. Thousands of species, millions of patients. It cannot be wrong. It's not wrong, Deho said. He was still watching the hatchling, which was now watching him back with much less aggression. It's just incomplete. The database probably has information on adult Varathi nutrition, maybe even adolescent. But juvenile, hatchling stage? The Varathi are nearly extinct now. When would the Council have collected that data? The truth of it settled over the observation room like a heavy blanket. The database had failed because it had gaps. The empaths had failed because they did not understand juvenile Varathi communication. The xenopsychologists had failed because they were treating symptoms instead of causes. A human had succeeded by asking a simple question. Hungry or angry? Inside the containment room, Deho slowly sat down on the floor. He crossed his legs and made himself smaller, less threatening. The hatchling watched him with tilted head. Its patterns were mostly blue now, with occasional flickers of green. We're going to get you some real food, Deho said softly. And then we're going to figure out what you've been trying to tell us. The hatchling's patterns pulsed once in bright purple. Then it did something no one expected. It stepped closer to the human and sat down facing him. not attacking, not running, just sitting, waiting. For the first time since its rescue, the Varathi hatchling stopped snarling. The next 6 hours changed everything. Hana had taken over one of the medical bay's lab spaces, converting it into something that looked more like a kitchen than a scientific facility. Containers were spread across every surface, each filled with different foods from a dozen different worlds. Protein compounds, carbohydrate blocks, synthesized fats, and even some fresh foods from the station's hydroponics bay. Deho sat on the floor of the containment room with the hatchling, slowly offering small samples of each food type. The creature was cautious at first, sniffing each offering carefully before deciding whether to eat it. Some foods it rejected immediately, turning its head away with patterns that flashed dark green. Others it ate slowly, testing, and some it devoured so quickly that Deho had to hold up his hands to slow it down. "Easy," he said gently. "You'll make yourself sick if you eat too fast." The hatchling did not understand his words, but it seemed to understand his tone. It slowed down, taking smaller bites. Its patterns had settled into a steady rhythm of soft blues and occasional greens. No red at all. Through the observation window, Dr. Quicks was recording everything. His secondary eyes tracked the food preferences, while his main eyes watched the interaction between human and hatchling. Ambassador Threlvax had left hours ago, muttering about reports she needed to file. But she had not ordered them to stop, which Deho took as permission to continue. "It prefers high-fat, high-protein foods," Hana said through the intercom, "and it really likes anything with a sweet component. I'm running the numbers now, but I think its caloric needs are at least 3 times what the standard database suggested." 3 times? Dr. Quick sounded shocked. That would mean it has been operating on 1/3 necessary nutrition for days. "Not even that," Hana replied. "Look at the timestamps. The automated system reduced portions yesterday because the food was not being eaten. It thought the hatchling needed less, not more." Deho felt a flash of anger on behalf of the small creature sitting across from him. The hatchling had been trying to tell them it was hungry. Its aggression, its screaming, its attacks, all of it had been a desperate attempt to communicate a simple need. And instead of listening, the station had reduced its food and increased its sedatives. But anger would not help now. Understanding would. He pulled out his personal data pad and opened a new file. For the next hour, he did nothing but watch the hatchling's bioluminescent patterns and take notes. Every color, every sequence, every pulse and flash. He noted what happened before each pattern and what the hatchling did after. Slowly, a picture began to form. Red meant distress or anger. That much had been obvious. But red combined with orange was not just anger. It was specifically hunger-related distress. Yellow was confusion or questioning. Green was rejection or negative response. Blue was contentment or acceptance. Purple seemed to be surprise or something unexpected. It was not a complete translation. The patterns were far more complex than simple color coding. But it was a start. "I think," Deho said slowly, "that juvenile Varathi communicate differently than adults because their needs are different. Adults can use complex language, negotiation, abstract concepts. But juveniles need to communicate basics: hungry, tired, scared, happy. It's not a lesser language, just a more direct one." "Like human babies crying," Hana said. "Parents learn to tell the difference between hungry crying and tired crying and scared crying." "Exactly." The hatchling's head turned toward the intercom speaker when Hana spoke. Its patterns flickered yellow, questioning. It looked at Deho, then at the speaker, then back at Deho. Deho smiled. "That's Hana, she's my friend. She's helping too." The hatchling tilted its head. Then its patterns pulsed blue-green, blue-green. "Acceptance of new information, maybe. Or acknowledgement." "It understood that you were introducing someone," Dr. Quick said with wonder in his voice. "Not the words, but the meaning behind them." "Context is language too," Deho replied. "Tone, gesture, situation. The hatchling is reading all of it." A chime sounded from Hana's station. "Okay, I've got a preliminary nutritional plan. High-calorie paste base supplemented with protein blocks and carbohydrate gels. I'm adding some of the sweet fruits it liked from hydroponics. This should give it everything it needs for healthy growth." "How long until you can have it ready?" "Already synthesizing." "Give me 20 minutes, Deho looked at the hatchling. It had finished eating the samples and was now grooming itself, using its claws to clean between its scales. The gesture was so normal, so everyday, that it was easy to forget this creature had been trying to claw people's faces off just hours ago. "Hey," Daeho said softly. The hatchling looked up. We're going to take care of you. I promise. The creature's patterns pulsed once in bright blue, then it did something unexpected. It moved closer to Daeho, crossing the invisible boundary of personal space that most creatures maintained. It sat down right next to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from its scaled body. Daeho held very still. This was trust. Fragile, tentative trust, but trust nonetheless. Slowly, carefully, he reached out one hand. The hatchling watched with sharp eyes. When Daeho's hand was close enough, the creature sniffed it thoroughly. Then, after a long moment of consideration, it pressed its snout against his palm. The scales were warm and surprisingly smooth. Daeho could feel the slight vibration of the creature's breathing. Its patterns cycled through gentle blues, and for the first time since he entered the containment room, Daeho heard a different sound. Not a snarl or a hiss, a soft, almost purring rumble. I'm getting this on recording, Dr. Quick said quietly. The first peaceful contact between the hatchling and any caregiver. Send a copy to the ambassador, Hana added. She needs to see this. The 20 minutes passed quickly. Hana entered the containment room carrying a large container filled with the new nutritional mixture. The hatchling tensed when the door opened, its patterns flaring yellow-orange, but Daeho placed his hand gently on its shoulder and it relaxed slightly. It's okay, he said. This is Hana, remember? My friend? Hana moved slowly, making herself smaller like Daeho had done. She set the container down and slid it across the floor. The hatchling sniffed the air and its patterns immediately brightened to interested yellow. Go ahead, Daeho encouraged. The hatchling approached the container carefully. It dipped one claw into the mixture and brought it to its mouth. Tasted, considered. Then its patterns exploded into brilliant blue and it shoved its whole snout into the container. Easy, Hana laughed. There's plenty. For the next 10 minutes, the hatchling ate with single-minded focus. It was not frantic like before, but determined, purposeful. When it finally pulled its head out of the container, its patterns were the brightest, most vivid blue anyone had seen yet. The creature looked at Hana, then at Daeho. Its patterns pulsed blue, 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 then a sequence neither human had seen before, blue, purple, blue, repeating. What does that mean? Hana whispered. I don't know, Daeho admitted, but I think it's good. The hatchling moved between them, sitting where it could see both humans. Then it did something else unexpected. It reached out with one small clawed hand and touched Hana's knee, just a gentle tap. Then it touched Daeho's arm the same way. I think, Hana said slowly, it's saying thank you. Over the next 2 days, the transformation was remarkable. With proper nutrition, the hatchling's aggressive episodes disappeared completely. It ate 6 times a day on a schedule that Hana carefully calibrated. It began to sleep properly, curling up in the corner of the containment room for regular rest periods. But more than that, it began to interact. Daeho brought in simple toys, things from the station's recreation areas, balls, blocks, puzzles. The hatchling was initially confused by the concept of play, but once it understood, it became enthusiastically engaged. Its problem-solving skills were impressive. It figured out complex puzzles in minutes. Hana introduced physical activities, creating an obstacle course in the containment room. The hatchling raced through it with obvious joy, its patterns flashing bright colors the whole time. They began teaching it standard Galactic, the common language used across the council species. The hatchling could not speak with its mouth. Its vocal structure was designed for hisses and rumbles, but its bioluminescent patterns proved adaptable. With practice, it learned to create simple words using light, yes and no and more and food and play. Dr. Quicks visited multiple times each day, his scientific fascination warring with his embarrassment at missing something so fundamental. The whole medical community failed this creature, he admitted to Daeho on the 3rd day. We were so focused on what might be wrong that we forgot to check what basic needs were not being met. It happens, Daeho said without judgment. Systems are designed to handle common problems. This was an uncommon situation. A juvenile Varathi, alone, traumatized in a station designed for adults. Nothing about this was standard. Still, a human saw what we missed. A human asked a different question. That's all. But it was not all, and everyone knew it. Ambassador Threlvax returned on the 4th day. She stood at the observation window for a long time, watching Daeho play a simple catching game with the hatchling. The creature's patterns were bright and happy. It was clearly thriving. "Explain to me," the ambassador said finally, "how humans understood a Varathi juvenile when the galaxy's best xenopsychologists could not." Deho considered his answer carefully. "We didn't have any preconceptions. We didn't know what juvenile Varathi were supposed to be like. So we just responded to what this one was showing us." "You treated it like a human child." "We treated it like a child," Deho corrected gently. "That's different." The ambassador's facets flickered, reflecting her internal processing. "The council will want to study your methods. This could change how we approach juvenile care across many species." "That's good," Hana said. "Every kid deserves to be understood." But there was something in the ambassador's tone that made Deho uneasy. Something that suggested this was not over. That maybe in some ways it was just beginning. Jiwoo Song arrived on Quarantine Station 7 with a reputation and 3 large cases of supplies. She was a psychologist, one of Earth's specialists in childhood trauma, and she moved through the station corridors with quiet confidence. Hana met her at the docking port. "How bad?" Jiwoo asked without preamble. "Better than it was," Hana replied honestly, "but complicated." They walked together toward the medical bay. Hana explained everything that had happened over the past week. The hunger, the breakthrough, the developing communication system, the rapid improvements. Jiwoo listened without interrupting, her dark eyes focused and analytical. When they reached the observation window, Jiwoo stopped. Inside the containment room, Deho was sitting on the floor with the hatchling. They were playing with colored blocks, the hatchling stacking them while its patterns pulsed in concentration. When a tower fell over, the creature's patterns flashed orange, but not the distressed orange from before. This was milder, more like frustration than fear. "It's coping better," Jiwoo observed. "On the surface, yes," Hana agreed. "But Deho says there are still problems. At night, when the lights dim, the hatchling panics. It won't let anyone leave the room. If it's alone for even a minute, it starts to spiral." Jiwoo nodded slowly. "Separation anxiety. Expected given what it experienced." They entered the containment room together. The hatchling's head snapped up immediately, patterns flaring yellow. Alert, questioning. It looked at Hana, then at the stranger, then at Deho. "It's okay," Deho said calmly. "This is Jiwoo. She's here to help." Jiwoo sat down on the floor a good distance away, not approaching. She simply sat and watched. The hatchling watched her back, patterns cycling through cautious yellows and greens. After a few minutes, Jiwoo pulled out a small handheld device and began taking notes, her movements slow and non-threatening. "Tell me about its sleep patterns," she said to Deho. "Irregular. It sleeps in short bursts, never more than 2 hours at a time. Always in the corner, always facing the door. If someone leaves the room, it wakes up immediately." "Nightmares?" "I think so. Sometimes it thrashes in its sleep. The patterns go dark, almost black. When it wakes, it's disoriented." Jiwoo made more notes. "The hatchling was buried in rubble for 6 days. In the dark, alone with its dead clutchmates. That kind of trauma doesn't just go away because basic needs are met." Bora Choi arrived an hour later. She was a nutritionist, brought in to fine-tune the hatchling's diet for long-term health. She was cheerful and practical, immediately getting along with both the hatchling and the human team. The creature seemed to like her energy, its patterns brightening whenever she entered the room. But it was Jiwoo who made the real breakthrough. She spent 3 full days just observing. She watched how the hatchling interacted with each person. She noted every pattern sequence, every behavior, every moment of stress or joy. She paid special attention to the times when the creature seemed most distressed. On the 4th day, she called a meeting. Deho, Hana, Bora, and Dr. Quicks gathered in the observation room while the hatchling slept, monitored by cameras. "I've been reviewing Varathi cultural data," Jiwoo began. "What little survived the solar flares. Varathi are intensely social creatures. Adults can function independently, but juveniles never do. They're raised in clutches, groups of 10 to 15 siblings, and they're never alone. Not ever. Being alone for a Varathi juvenile is like being underwater for a human. It's not a natural state. It's a survival threat." "So the aggression wasn't just hunger," Dr. Quick said slowly. "The hunger was the immediate crisis. But the deeper problem is isolation. This hatchling has been alone in a way that its entire evolutionary history says is impossible. It's not supposed to exist as a solitary individual. Every instinct it has is screaming that something is fundamentally wrong." Daeho looked through the window at the sleeping creature. That's why it panics when we leave. Yes, you've become its clutch by default. When you're present, the wrongness decreases. When you leave, it returns in full force. What do we do? Hana asked. Jiwoo pulled up a document on her datapad. We can't give it Varathi siblings, but we can provide constant companionship. We need to set up a rotation schedule. The hatchling should never be alone. Not for meals, not for sleep, not ever. We need to simulate the constant presence of a clutch. That's a significant resource commitment, Dr. Quick said carefully. It's necessary, Jiwoo replied firmly. Without it, the hatchling will continue to suffer. The trauma will compound. We might be feeding its body, but we're starving its psychological needs. Commander Vex attended the next council briefing. He was a Tornak, a species known for military efficiency and practical thinking. His exoskeleton was decorated with service medals, and his multiple eye stalks swiveled independently to track everyone in the room. This is ridiculous, he stated flatly. The resources being dedicated to one juvenile could rebuild infrastructure for hundreds of adult Varathi. This is emotional thinking, not strategic. Ambassador Threlvax nodded slightly. The commander raises a valid concern. The human approach, while successful at addressing immediate symptoms, may not be sustainable long-term. Daeho felt his jaw tighten, but Jiwoo spoke before he could. With respect, Commander, the hatchling is not a resource allocation problem. It's a child who survived a planetary catastrophe. If we abandon it now because it's inconvenient, what does that say about the Galactic Council's values? It says we prioritize the many over the one, Commander Vex replied. That is not cruelty. That is practicality. The many and the one aren't separate, Hana interjected. Every adult Varathi survivor lost their clutches too. They're all traumatized. If we can help this hatchling heal, we learn how to help them too. The debate continued for another hour, but eventually a compromise was reached. The human team would be allowed to continue their intensive care program, but only for 30 days. After that, the hatchling would need to transition to standard care protocols. 30 days. It was not enough, but it was something. The rotation schedule began immediately. Daeho took the morning shifts. Hana covered afternoons. Bora handled evening meals. Jiwoo took the overnight hours, sleeping in the containment room with the hatchling. Other volunteers from the human contingent on the station filled in the gaps. The effect was immediate and profound. With constant companionship, the hatchling's anxiety decreased dramatically. It began sleeping for longer periods. Its patterns stayed in calmer color ranges. Most remarkably, it began to play in ways that seemed more natural and less frantic. Jiwoo introduced something new: group activities. She gathered the rotation team together in the containment room, and they played games as a group. Simple things like passing a ball in a circle or building towers together. The hatchling participated with obvious joy, its patterns cycling through happy blues and excited purples. Look at this, Jiwoo said to Daeho during one of these sessions. Watch how it interacts differently when multiple people are present versus one-on-one. The hatchling was playing with Bora and Hana, chasing a rolling ball. When it caught it, it did not immediately return to the game. Instead, it looked at both humans, patterns pulsing in a complex sequence. Blue, purple, green, blue. It's checking in, Daeho realized, making sure everyone is still present and engaged. Exactly. That's clutch behavior. It's not just playing with toys. It's maintaining social bonds with its group. Over the following weeks, they introduced more complex concepts. They taught the hatchling that different humans had different roles. Bora meant food time. Hana meant active play. Jiwoo meant calm time and sleep. Daeho meant learning and exploration. The hatchling's light pattern language expanded rapidly. It learned to display more words, more concepts. Tired, happy, scared, friend. That last one appeared suddenly one evening, flashing across the hatchling's scales as it sat between Daeho and Jiwoo. Friend, Daeho read aloud, his voice catching slightly. The hatchling's patterns pulsed bright blue. Then it did something new. It created a pattern Daeho had never seen before. A steady blue glow that outlined the shapes of two beings sitting close together. A picture made of light, a representation of friendship. Jiwoo wiped her eyes quickly. It's creating art, abstract representation. That's high-level cognitive function. It's also saying something important, Daeho said. It's telling us what we mean to it. But not everyone was impressed. Commander Vex observed one of the group sessions with obvious disapproval. You are teaching it to depend on humans. What happens when you leave? When it must integrate with other Varathi? We're teaching it that it can form bonds after loss, Jiwoo countered. That's not dependence. That's resilience. The 30-day deadline approached faster than anyone wanted. As the date neared, Ambassador Threlvax called another meeting. The Council has located several adult Varathi among the survivors, she announced. They have agreed to assess the hatchling for potential adoption. If suitable, the transition will begin immediately. Daeho's stomach dropped. The hatchling isn't ready for that. It's barely started processing its trauma. It has had 30 days of intensive human care. That was the agreement. Agreements can be extended, not without cause. Jiwoo stood. I'll give you cause. The hatchling has formed attachment bonds with its current care team. Severing those bonds abruptly will cause severe psychological harm. It will set back every bit of progress we've made. Then perhaps, Commander Vex said coldly, the progress was a mistake. Perhaps teaching a Varathi to bond with humans was the wrong approach from the start. The hatchling itself provided an answer to that debate, though not in a way anyone expected. It was late at night during Jiwoo's shift. She was half asleep, resting against the wall while the hatchling dozed nearby. The door opened quietly. Dr. Quicks entered to check on the evening medical readouts. The hatchling woke instantly, patterns flaring yellow-orange, alert and questioning. But it did not attack. It looked at Jiwoo first, checking. She was still there, still present. The patterns calmed to yellow. Then the hatchling did something remarkable. It moved to position itself between Jiwoo and Dr. Quicks, not aggressively but deliberately. Its patterns cycled in a complex sequence that roughly translated to, "This one is mine. I protect." Dr. Quicks froze. "It is guarding you." "No," Jiwoo said softly, fully awake now. "It's guarding its clutch. We're not just caregivers anymore. We're family." The hatchling's patterns pulsed once in brilliant blue, confirming the statement in a way that no words could match. The Galactic Council chamber was a massive space designed to hold representatives from hundreds of worlds. Today it held only a handful of people, but the weight of the decision before them felt heavier than any crowd. Taeyang Lim adjusted his formal jacket and reviewed his notes one final time. He was a diplomat and lawyer, experienced in arguing cases before the council, but this one was different. This one mattered in a way that went beyond politics or policy. Beside him sat Seokjin Kang, a xenoanthropologist whose research had helped shape humanity's understanding of dozens of alien cultures. Behind them, in the observation gallery, sat Daeho, Hana, Jiwoo, and Bora. They were not allowed to speak during the proceedings, but their presence was important. This was their fight too. Ambassador Threlvax called the session to order. This council has convened to address the matter of the Varathi, juvenile currently in human care aboard Quarantine Station 7. The question before us is whether to allow the current arrangement to continue or to transfer the juvenile to Varathi adult guardians as originally planned. Commander Vex spoke first. The answer is obvious. The juvenile is Varathi. It should be raised by Varathi, according to Varathi customs and traditions. Anything else is cultural contamination. Cultural contamination, Taeyang repeated slowly, standing to address the council. That's an interesting phrase, Commander. It implies that human care is somehow toxic, harmful, but the evidence shows exactly the opposite. He activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air above the council floor. The hatchling in its first days, patterns flashing angry red, claws extended. Then recent images, the hatchling playing, learning, resting peacefully. The contrast was stark. When the hatchling arrived on the station, it was dying. Not from physical injuries, but from a complete failure of the care system. The Galactic Council, with all its resources and expertise, could not help this child. Humans could. Humans did. Ambassador Threlvax's facets flickered. No one disputes that the human intervention was successful initially. But the question is whether humans are appropriate long-term guardians for a Varathi juvenile. Why wouldn't we be? Hana called out from the gallery, unable to keep silent. Because, the ambassador replied patiently, the Galactic Council operates on established matrices. Each species has approved interaction protocols, socialization parameters, and care standards developed over centuries. These matrices ensure optimal development. Humans have been part of the galactic community for only 40 years. You are not in any species-approved matrices. Tae-young smiled slightly. And yet here we are. The matrices failed. The protocols failed. The standards failed. What succeeded was something the matrices don't account for: adaptability and compassion. Seokjin stood, bringing up his own data on the holographic display. If I may, I'd like to address the deeper issue here. The Council's matrix system is scientifically rigorous, yes, but it has a fundamental flaw. It's designed for optimal outcomes under normal circumstances. It's not designed for edge cases, trauma, or individual variation. He changed the display to show comparative data. Look at this. The matrix for Varathi juvenile care assumes the presence of a clutch. It assumes community support. It assumes a stable environment. But this hatchling has none of those things. The matrix offers no solutions for a traumatized, isolated juvenile of a near-extinct species. Then the matrix should be updated, Commander Vex stated. Updated with what data? Seokjin challenged. There are fewer than 5,000 Varathi survivors in the entire galaxy. How many are juveniles? How many are hatchlings? The sample size is too small. By the time you gather enough data to update the matrix properly, this particular hatchling will be an adult. Counselor Mimrix spoke for the first time. She was an Aquilian, her voice rippling like water. The human makes a valid point. Our matrices are powerful tools, but they are not perfect. They cannot account for every situation. Ambassador Threlvax turned to face Counselor Mimrix. You believe the humans should be allowed to continue? I believe we should not dismiss what is working simply because it does not fit our expectations. The debate continued for hours. Representatives from various species weighed in. Some supported the human approach. Others argued for traditional methods. The council was deeply divided. During a recess, Daeho found Tae-yang in a side corridor. How bad is it? Honest assessment. We're going to lose, Tae-yang replied. The council doesn't want to admit their system failed. Easier to say humans got lucky than to acknowledge their matrices are incomplete. So what happens to the hatchling? They'll transfer it to adult Varathi guardians. The adults are all traumatized themselves. None of them are ready to parent, but that doesn't matter. The matrix says Varathi raise Varathi, so that's what will happen. Daeho leaned against the wall, feeling defeated. We saved its life just to watch the council destroy it again. Not yet, Jiwoo said, appearing from around the corner. It's not over yet. When the session resumed, Ambassador Threlvax announced the council's preliminary decision. After careful consideration, the council has determined that while human care has been beneficial temporarily, long-term guardianship should be transferred to Varathi adults. However, as a compromise, the human team may continue their involvement in a supervisory capacity until a suitable foster family is identified. How long? Tae-yang asked. Indefinitely, until a suitable placement is found. It sounded like a victory, but everyone knew it was a death sentence by delay. The Varathi adults who had been interviewed were all dealing with their own grief and trauma. None of them felt capable of raising a juvenile. The council knew this, but it allowed them to maintain the fiction that they were following proper protocols. Daeho felt sick. They had won extra time, but only by trapping the hatchling in limbo. Back on Quarantine Station 7, life continued. The hatchling did not understand council politics or custody battles. It only knew that its clutch of humans kept coming back, kept caring for it, kept playing and teaching and protecting. But something was wrong, and the hatchling could sense it. The humans were sad. Even when they smiled, their energy was off. The hatchling's patterns cycled through concerned yellows and questioning purples, trying to understand. It was Bora who noticed it first. The hatchling knows something is wrong. Look at how it keeps checking on us. Making sure we're okay. It's perceptive, Jiwoo agreed. More than we realized. One evening, during a particularly somber group session, the hatchling did something extraordinary. It approached each human in turn and gently pressed its snout against their hands, one by one. Daeho, Hana, Jiwoo, Bora. Then it positioned itself in the center of the group and created a light pattern. 4 human-shaped figures in a circle, with a smaller Varathi shape in the middle. All connected by lines of blue light. Family, the hatchling's pattern spelled out. My family, Hana started crying. She tried to hide it, but the hatchling noticed immediately. Its patterns flared concerned orange. It moved to Hana and pressed closer, its own form of comfort. I'm okay, Hana said, her voice thick. I'm just sad. The hatchling understood sad. It had been sad for a long time before the humans came. It created another pattern, the Varathi shape surrounded by dark colors alone. Then the same shape surrounded by human figures in bright colors together. Sad before, the pattern said. Happy now? We're happy with you too, Deho said quietly. We're worried about the future. The hatchling tilted its head. Future was a complex concept, but it understood worry. Worry was yellow-orange patterns, tension in the body, distraction in the mind. Its humans had all of those signs. Over the next week, something shifted in the hatchling. It became more deliberate, more purposeful. It spent time every day practicing its light pattern language, expanding its vocabulary. It asked questions constantly, trying to understand more about the humans and their world. Young Mihan visited during this time. She was an observer for the human delegation, tasked with monitoring the situation and reporting back to Earth. She spent several days on the station, watching the interactions between the hatchling and its human care team. This is incredible, she said to Deho. Do you realize what you've accomplished? This isn't just about one hatchling anymore. Every human who sees these recordings, who hears this story, they're all invested now. What do you mean? Young Mi smiled. The council might see this as an edge case, an anomaly. But to humans, this is a child who needed help. That's universal. There's a grassroots movement building on Earth and the colonies. People want to know that the hatchling will be okay. Can they help? I think they already are. Pressure is building. The council doesn't like to admit it, but public opinion matters. If enough species populations start asking why their representatives aren't supporting interspecies foster care, things will have to change. A message came through 3 days later. Minister Jae-hwa An, Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, requested a private meeting with Ambassador Threlvax. The meeting lasted 4 hours. When it was over, Jae-hwa called a press conference. Representatives from dozens of species attended, their recording devices focused on the human minister. Today I presented a formal proposal to the Galactic Council, Jae-hwa announced. Humanity requests permission to formally adopt the Varathi juvenile currently in our care. Furthermore, we propose the establishment of an interspecies foster care system with proper oversight and safeguards for situations where traditional species-specific care is not available or appropriate. The room erupted. Questions came from every direction. Jae-hwa raised her hands for quiet. This is not about humans claiming superior knowledge or methods. This is about recognizing that sometimes, in extraordinary circumstances, the best family isn't the one that shares your DNA. It's the one that shows up when you need them. The proposal was unprecedented. Nothing like it had ever been suggested in Galactic Council history. The legal implications alone were staggering. Questions of citizenship, rights, cultural preservation, and biological needs would all need to be addressed. But the alternative was abandoning a child to a system that had already failed it once. Ambassador Threlvax called an emergency session. This time, when Taiyang entered the council chamber, he was not alone. Behind him walked Daeho, Hana, Jiwoo, and Bora. And with them, escorted carefully by station security, came the hatchling itself. The creature's patterns cycled nervously as it entered the massive chamber. So many aliens, so many strange smells and sounds, but its humans were there, flanking it protectively, and that made it bearable. Ambassador Threlvax looked down at the small being standing in the center of the council floor. This is highly irregular. So is everything about this situation, Taeyang replied. But the hatchling has a voice. It deserves to be heard. It cannot speak in any language the council recognizes. Then watch. The hatchling moved to the center of the chamber's projection field. It took a deep breath, its patterns flickering as it concentrated. Then it began to create light. The pattern grew larger than any it had made before, expanding to fill the projection space above the council floor. Images formed. The destruction of Vareth Prime, the loneliness and fear, the anger and hunger. Then the humans arriving, offering food and comfort, learning and playing and healing together. The final image was the most powerful. 4 human figures and 1 Varathi, connected by unbreakable bonds of light. The hatchling's pattern spelled out one word, large enough for everyone to see: family. The silence in the council chamber was absolute. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species watched the light display fade. Watched the small Varathi hatchling standing in the center of the floor with its pattern still pulsing that single word: family. Commander Vex was the first to speak. It has been trained to perform. This display proves nothing about what is best for its development. With respect, Commander, Counselor Myrick said quietly, that display proves everything. The hatchling was asked no questions. It was given no prompts. It chose to communicate its truth. Should we not listen? The debate that followed was intense. Legal experts argued about precedent and jurisdiction. Cultural specialists worried about assimilation and identity. Medical professionals discussed biological compatibility and developmental needs. Everyone had an opinion, and no one could agree. But while the council argued, something else was happening across human space. Young me had not been exaggerating. The story of the hatchling had spread like fire through Earth and all its colonies. News feeds carried daily updates. Social networks exploded with discussions. Artists created works inspired by the tiny alien and its human family. Children in schools asked their teachers why the council would not let the hatchling stay with the people who saved it. It was not organized or planned. It was simply millions of humans responding to something fundamental. A child in need and adults who refused to abandon it. Captain Do Hyun. Shin commanded a relief vessel that had been delivering supplies to Varathi refugees. When he heard about the council debate, he changed course. His ship arrived at Quarantine Station 7 carrying something unexpected. A delegation. There were xenobiologists who had studied Varathi culture for decades. There were child development experts with innovative theories about cross-species socialization. There were trauma counselors who specialized in refugee care. And there were 3 Varathi adults who had survived the solar flares. Deho met them in the docking bay. You came. One of the Varathi adults, an engineer named Thrix, stepped forward. Her scales were scarred from radiation exposure, and her patterns moved slowly, still weighted by grief. We heard about the hatchling, about what you humans have done for it. We just did what anyone should do, Deho said. No, Thrix replied. You did what we could not. Our entire world died. We are still learning how to exist in this reality. We cannot care for a juvenile when we can barely care for ourselves. But you can. You are. The second Varathi, a teacher named Vorin, added, We have come to testify to the council. The hatchling should stay with you. It is the right thing, even if it is not the traditional thing. The third Varathi remained silent, but her patterns pulsed agreement. The hearing resumed 2 days later. The council chamber was more crowded now. The new arrivals sat in the gallery, their presence adding weight to the proceedings. Minister Jae-hwa presented the formal adoption proposal. It was a comprehensive document, hundreds of pages of carefully considered policy. It addressed every concern the council had raised and many they had not. The proposal included provisions for cultural education. The hatchling would be taught Varathi history, language and customs by Varathi survivors working with the human care team. It would learn about its heritage even while living with humans. It addressed biological needs. Human medical teams had consulted with Varathi health specialists to ensure proper nutrition, development monitoring, and preventive care. The hatchling's unique dietary and environmental requirements would be met. It covered legal status. The hatchling would hold dual citizenship in both Earth and the Varathi survivor community. It would have rights and protections under both human and galactic law. Most importantly, it established oversight. The arrangement would be reviewed regularly by both human and council authorities. The hatchling's well-being would be monitored continuously. If at any point the situation was deemed harmful, changes would be made. This is not humans claiming ownership of a Varathi child, Jae-hwa stated clearly. This is humans offering to be family to a child who has lost everything. There is a difference. Suk-jin presented research data comparing human child-rearing practices across cultures with galactic norms. The patterns were fascinating. Human societies showed enormous variation in how they raised children, yet all produced functional adults. Some cultures prioritized independence, others emphasized community. Some valued conformity, others celebrated individuality. Humans have always known something the galactic matrix system apparently forgot, Seok-jin explained. There is no single correct way to raise a child. What matters is love, safety, and consistency. What matters is showing up. The Varathi survivors testified next. Thrix spoke about the difficulty of processing species-wide trauma. Vorin explained why traditional Varathi child-rearing practices were impossible given current circumstances. The third Varathi, whose name was Kel, finally spoke. "I lost my clutch in the flares," Kel said, her patterns dim with old grief. 12 hatchlings all dead. I see their faces every day. I am not ready to parent again. Maybe I never will be. But this hatchling, this survivor, it deserves a chance. The humans are giving it that chance. Ambassador Threlvax listened to everything. Her crystalline face was unreadable, but her questions were sharp and probing. She asked about attachment disorders, about identity confusion, about the psychological impact of being raised by another species. Jiwoo answered most of these questions. The hatchling will face challenges, yes. Any child raised in non-traditional circumstances faces challenges. But humans have extensive experience with adoption, with blended families, with children who don't look like their parents. We know how to help children build healthy identities that honor both their biological heritage and their lived experience. And if the hatchling grows to resent being raised by humans, the ambassador asked, then we help it process those feelings. We don't pretend everything is perfect. We acknowledge the complexity and work through it together. That's what families do. The debate stretched across 3 full days. Arguments were made and countered. Evidence was presented and analyzed. Legal scholars drafted and redrafted language. Everyone was exhausted. Finally, on the evening of the 3rd day, Ambassador Threlvax called for a vote. The council would decide: allow humanity's unprecedented adoption proposal, or maintain traditional protocols and transfer the hatchling to Varathi adults, who had already stated they were not ready for the responsibility. The vote was not unanimous. Several species representatives voted against the proposal, citing concerns about precedent and cultural integrity, but more voted in favor. Not by a huge margin, but enough. The proposal passed with conditions. The adoption would be approved on a provisional basis. The arrangement would be reviewed every year for the next 15 years. The hatchling would receive mandatory cultural education from Varathi specialists. Human caregivers would undergo continuous training in Varathi biology and psychology. Any sign that the situation was harmful to the hatchling's development would result in immediate intervention. It was not perfect. It was bureaucratic and full of oversight and restrictions, but it was permission. Official permission for humans to be family to an alien child. When the vote was announced, the gallery erupted. Humans cheered. Several alien species representatives applauded. Even some who had voted against the proposal seemed relieved that a solution had been found. Back on Quarantine Station 7, Daeho told the hatchling what had happened. He was not sure how much the creature understood about council politics and legal frameworks, but it understood the important part. "You get to stay with us," he said simply. The hatchling's patterns exploded into brilliant blue, brighter than they had ever been. It bounced excitedly, unable to contain its joy. Then it did something new. It ran to each human in turn, Daeho, Hana, Jiwoo, Bora, pressing its snout against them and creating happy light patterns. "We need to give you a proper name," Hana said. "Something that means something." They discussed options. Varathi names were complex, involving both sound and light patterns. Human names were simpler but carried their own meanings. They wanted something that honored both. It was the hatchling itself that made the choice. It created a light pattern that spelled out Day, the beginning of Daeho's name. Then it added Varathi symbols that meant survivor and new beginning. "Day," Bora repeated. "It's perfect, are you sure?" Daeho asked the hatchling. "You want to take part of my name?" Dee's patterns pulsed yes, 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 then created another display. Daeho and Day, connected by bonds of light. The humans had to file official paperwork. There were forms to complete, approvals to obtain, legal processes to navigate. Humanity's first interspecies adoption required mountains of documentation. But while the adults handled bureaucracy, Day simply lived. It ate meals prepared by Bora. It played games with Hana. It learned new things with Daeho. It slept safely with Jiwoo watching over it. Life continued, but now with the security of knowing it would not be torn away. The interspecies fostering and adoption agency that Jaehua had proposed became reality 6 months later. It was a small office to start with, staffed by human and alien specialists working together. They developed protocols for assessing situations, matching species needs with caregiver capabilities, and providing ongoing support. Day was not the only success story. A Zentari infant whose parents died in an accident was fostered by a human family on Mars colony. A human child orphaned by a ship malfunction was adopted by a Veltharian pair who had lost their own offspring. The list grew slowly but steadily. Not every attempt worked. Some matches failed because the biological differences were too great. Some failed because cultural gaps could not be bridged. But enough succeeded to prove the concept was sound. Family, it turned out, was more flexible than anyone had realized. 5 years passed. New Varath was a small colony world being rebuilt with assistance from a dozen species. The architecture was different from old Varath, necessarily so, but it incorporated traditional design elements where possible. It was a place of both mourning and hope. Day visited the memorial garden there regularly. It was a quiet space filled with crystal markers, each one representing a life lost in the solar flares. Thousands and thousands of markers. The sheer scale of the loss was overwhelming. Dee stood in front of a section dedicated to hatchlings. Its original clutch was memorialized here, each sibling's name and pattern recorded in permanent light displays. Day's own patterns cycled through colors that meant grief and remembrance. Deho stood nearby, giving the young Varathi space but staying close enough to provide support. Day was much larger now, nearly adolescent by Varathi standards. Its patterns had grown more complex and sophisticated, incorporating elements from both Varathi biological language and human-style emotional expression. "I miss them," Day's pattern said. It had learned to combine light displays with simple vocalizations, creating a unique hybrid communication style. "I know," Deho replied. "It's okay to miss them. I am happy with you, and sad about them. Both things are true." Yes, both things can be true at the same time. They stood together in silence for a while. Then Day did something it had been practicing. It created a light pattern that showed two groups, the original clutch that was lost and the human family that was found. The pattern showed them not as separate or competing, but as both part of Day's story. Both important. Both loved. "My first family and my chosen family," Day's patterns explained. "Exactly," Deho said softly. They walked back toward the colony's residential area. Day had a session scheduled with Thrix, who taught Varathi history and culture. After that would be a video call with Hana, who was working on Earth now but stayed in constant contact. Later, Jiwoo would arrive for their weekly session, though those were less about therapy and more about just talking these days. Other young beings were at the education center when they arrived. Dee was not the only one anymore. 17 other juveniles from various species were part of the interspecies program now, all living with families that did not share their DNA, but shared everything else that mattered. Day greeted them with complex light displays, and they responded in their own ways. A Zentari clicked its mandibles in friendship. A small creature from a methane atmosphere world pulsed colors through its translation device. A human child adopted by Aquilians waved enthusiastically. They were all different, all unique, all learning to belong in families that traditional thinking said should not work. But they did work. They worked because everyone involved chose to make them work. They worked because love was more powerful than biology. They worked because somewhere along the way the galaxy had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the best answer to "you hungry or angry" is simply, "I care enough to ask." Deho watched Day join the other young beings, patterns bright with happiness. The hatchling that once snarled at everyone had grown into a confident young being who could move between worlds, between species, between identities, and find home in all of them. Minister Jaehua had been right. This was not about humans being better or superior. This was about humans seeing a need and responding with the resources they had. Flexibility, empathy, and a stubborn refusal to accept that caring was ever a waste of time. The Galactic Council's matrices were being revised, incorporating insights from the interspecies program. Traditional approaches were not being discarded, but supplemented. The rigid categories were becoming more flexible. The focus was shifting from what was standard to what was needed. It would take time. Change always did. But the change had begun, started by one small hatchling and the humans who refused to give up on it. As Deho prepared to leave the education center, Day ran back for a moment. Its patterns pulsed a question. "You will be here when I finish?" "Always," Deho promised. "That's what family means." Day's patterns flashed brilliant blue. Then it displayed one more message before returning to its friends. "Best family. Chose me when nobody else could." I choose you back. And really, Deho thought, what more could anyone ask for than that? The galaxy was vast and full of different beings with different needs and different ways of living. But some truths were universal. Children needed safety and love. Families were built through choice and commitment. And sometimes the most important question anyone could ask was simply, "Are you okay? Can I help?" Humanity had not changed the galaxy by being stronger or smarter or more advanced. Humanity had changed it by caring when caring seemed inefficient, by adapting when others insisted on rigidity, and by proving that family had never been about biology alone. The hatchling had snarled at everyone until a human asked if it was hungry or angry. That simple question, that basic act of trying to understand, had changed everything for one small Varathi survivor, for the humans who chose to care, and ultimately for a galaxy that was learning that there were more kinds of family than anyone had imagined. Day's light patterns could be seen through the education center windows, bright and happy and whole. Healed, not despite being raised by humans, but because of it, and that made all the difference.